Hey everyone, tonight, we're traveling to a place where the sky seems endless and the grass stretches farther than the eye can see. Before we begin, settle in, get comfortable, and let the story gently carry you into the distant past. Long before the Mongols built the largest connected land empire in history, the people of the Central Asian steppe lived quiet but demanding lives. There were no towering castles or crowded cities here. Instead, families traveled across wide grasslands with their horses, sheep, goats, and cattle, always searching for fresh pasture and clean water. Their homes were round felt tents called jairs. These homes could be taken apart within hours, loaded onto carts, and moved whenever the seasons changed. Life was always in motion. A child born on the steppe might wake up to a different view every few weeks. The weather shaped everything. Summer brought warm winds and endless fields, while winter covered the land with bitter snow and dangerous ice. Every family learned that survival depended on preparation, cooperation, and resilience. The horse was the center of daily life. Mongol children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Horses carried families across great distances, helped gather animals, and provided milk that could be turned into food and drink. A skilled rider was respected throughout the steppe. But the grasslands were not peaceful all the time. Many tribes competed for land, animals, and influence. Alliances formed and disappeared as quickly as the changing wind. One season's friend could become the next season's rival. Among these scattered tribes, one small clan lived without knowing that history was about to change forever. Around the year 1162, a boy named Temujin was born into the Borjigin clan. No one could have imagined that this quiet child would one day unite the divided tribes of the steppe and reshape the known world. For now, however, he was simply another boy growing up beneath the endless blue sky, surrounded by horses, family, and the unpredictable beauty of the Mongolian plains. His remarkable journey was only just beginning. Temujin's childhood did not remain peaceful for long. When he was only a young boy, his father, Yasuji, set out on a journey to arrange his son's future marriage. On the way home, he stopped to share a meal with a rival tribe. Unknown to him, old enemies recognized his name. They quietly poisoned his food. Yasuji managed to return home, but he soon died from the illness. His passing changed everything. Without their leader, Temujin's family quickly lost the support of their clan. The people who had once followed Yasuji abandoned his widow and children, believing they could no longer protect them. Overnight, they went from respected leaders to struggling survivors. Temujin's mother, Holun, refused to surrender. She gathered wild plants, dug up roots, caught fish from cold streams, and taught her children to share every meal, no matter how small. Some days there was barely enough food for everyone, yet the family endured together. The harsh steppe became their greatest teacher. Every season demanded patience. Every storm reminded them that nature cared little for human plans. As Temujin grew older, he became quiet and observant. He watched the movements of animals, listened carefully to older travelers, and learned which people could be trusted. These difficult years taught him lessons that no palace or wealthy court ever could. The boy also realized that family alone could not guarantee safety. Loyalty had to be earned through kindness, fairness, and courage. Those ideas would later shape the empire he had not yet imagined. Although life remained uncertain, Temujin refused to believe that hardship would last forever. Beyond the endless grasslands, opportunities waited for those willing to face danger. The lonely boy who had lost almost everything was slowly becoming someone who could change the destiny of an entire continent. As Temujin entered his teenage years, life on the steppe became even more uncertain. Every tribe searched for stronger alliances, while old rivalries continued to shape daily life. Trust was difficult to find, and promises could disappear as quickly as the morning mist. Years earlier, Temujin's father had arranged for him to marry a young woman named Borte. When the time came, Temujin traveled to her family's camp and the two were married according to Mongol tradition. Borte would remain one of the most trusted people in his life. For a short while, it seemed that fortune had begun to smile upon the young couple. They built a modest home, cared for their animals, and looked toward the future with hope. That peace did not last. One night, warriors from the Merkit tribe attacked their camp. The raid happened so quickly that there was little time to react. In the confusion, Borte was taken away, while Temujin escaped with only a handful of companions. Many people might have accepted the loss and started over. Temujin did not. Instead, he searched for allies willing to stand beside him. He reached out to powerful leaders who had once known his father and asked for their help. Some agreed not because Temujin was wealthy or famous, but because they saw determination in the young man. Together, they launched a carefully planned rescue. After a swift campaign, Borte was freed and safely returned home. The victory meant far more than the rescue of one person. It showed that Temujin could inspire loyalty and unite different groups for a common purpose. His reputation quietly began to grow across the endless grasslands. Few people realized it at the time, but this small success marked the beginning of a much greater journey, one that would eventually unite the scattered tribes of Mongolia under a single leader. The rescue of Borte changed more than Temujin's personal life. Across the steppe, people began speaking about the young leader who had refused to surrender. His courage earned respect, but respect alone would never unite the tribes. The Mongolian plains remained divided. Every clan had its own chief, its own traditions, and its own ambitions. Small disputes over grazing land, horses, or old family rivalries often turned into violent conflicts. Peace rarely lasted for long. Temujin believed there could be another way. Instead of choosing followers only from noble families, he welcomed anyone who proved loyal, honest, and capable. A skilled shepherd, hunter, or warrior could earn an important place beside him. This was unusual on the steppe, where family background often mattered more than ability. Many young men were drawn to this new idea. They saw a leader who rewarded effort instead of birth. Little by little, Temujin's camp grew larger. Not everyone approved. One of his greatest rivals was Jamukha, a childhood friend who had once called Temujin his brother. As the years passed, their visions for the future became very different. Jamukha supported the old traditions, while Temujin believed the tribes needed change. Their friendship slowly faded, replaced by competition and distrust. The steppe watched carefully as both leaders gathered supporters. Families were forced to choose sides, knowing that the decision could shape their future for generations. Temujin spent long evenings listening to his advisors, planning carefully rather than acting in haste. He understood that true strength came not only from brave warriors, but from unity, discipline, and trust. The winds continued to sweep across the endless grasslands, carrying whispers of change from one camp to another. A great struggle was approaching, and before long, the scattered tribes of Mongolia would face a decision that would transform their history forever. Part 5. The rivalry between Temujin and Jamukha slowly became the defining struggle of the Mongolian steppe. Both men had loyal followers, skilled horsemen, and dreams of leading the tribes, but they believed in very different futures. Jamukha preferred the old customs. Noble families held the highest positions, and power remained in the hands of a few respected clans. It was the way things had always been. Temujin imagined something different. He believed that loyalty should matter more than family name. A brave warrior, a wise advisor, or a hard-working herdsman could rise through the ranks if they proved their worth. This simple idea attracted people from many different tribes. As more families joined him, Temujin treated them as members of one growing community instead of separate clans. He encouraged cooperation, shared responsibilities, and fair rewards after each victory. Not every tribe accepted his leadership peacefully. Some resisted, believing they would lose their independence. Small battles broke out across the steppe, but Temujin often preferred negotiation before conflict. When peaceful solutions failed, he acted quickly and with careful planning. His reputation continued to spread. Travelers carried stories of a leader who rewarded honesty, kept his promises, and protected those who remained loyal. Even former enemies sometimes chose to stand beside him. Season after season, the balance of power slowly changed. The scattered tribes that had spent generations competing against one another were beginning to gather under a single banner. It was a slow process, built through patience as much as courage. Temujin knew the journey was not over. One final gathering still lay ahead, where the leaders of the steppe would decide whether he truly deserved to lead them all. That decision would change not only Mongolia, but the history of the entire world. In the spring of 1206, leaders from many Mongol tribes gathered beside the flowing waters of the Onon River. It was a moment unlike any before. For generations, these tribes had lived as rivals, but now they had come together to decide the future of the steppe. The gathering, known as a Kurultai, lasted for several days. Elders, warriors, and respected chiefs discussed the victories, hardships, and leadership of Temujin. His years of determination had earned the trust of people from many different clans. At last, a decision was reached. Temujin was chosen as the supreme leader of the united Mongol tribes. From that day forward, he received a new title, Genghis Khan, often understood to mean a universal or oceanic ruler. The announcement echoed across the open grasslands. For the first time, many of the tribes that had spent centuries divided now stood together under one leader. Genghis Khan understood that victory alone would not hold the empire together. He immediately began organizing his people in new ways. Instead of grouping warriors by family or tribe, he mixed them together. This encouraged loyalty to the nation rather than to individual clans. He also introduced clear rules that applied to everyone, from ordinary herders to respected commanders. Discipline, honesty, and responsibility became the foundation of his growing empire. Messengers traveled across the steppe carrying news of the new leader. Some neighboring kingdoms watched with curiosity. Others grew uneasy, wondering what this united nation might become. For the people of the Mongolian plains, daily life continued much as before. Families still cared for their animals, moved with the seasons, and slept beneath the vast night sky. Yet they knew something remarkable had happened. A new chapter had begun. The united Mongols were no longer just scattered tribes surviving on the steppe. They had become a nation with a single purpose, led by a man whose ambitions would soon reach far beyond the endless grasslands. After becoming Genghis Khan, Temujin faced his greatest challenge yet. Creating a united nation was only the beginning. Keeping that nation strong would require careful planning, new ideas, and a different way of organizing Mongol society. The Mongol Empire was built on discipline. Genghis Khan understood that a large army could not succeed without order. He created groups of warriors based on a decimal system, dividing soldiers into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This system made the army easier to command and reduced the power of old tribal divisions. Warriors who once fought only for their own clans now fought together as Mongols. Genghis Khan also rewarded talent and loyalty. A person's background mattered less than their ability. Skilled commanders could rise from humble beginnings if they showed courage and intelligence. This approach created a strong sense of unity among his followers. Beyond the battlefield, communication became important. The Mongols developed a network of messengers who could travel across enormous distances carrying important information. These riders moved quickly between camps and later helped connect the vast empire. Genghis Khan also respected knowledge. He welcomed people from different cultures, including writers, craftsmen, and advisors. He understood that an empire needed more than warriors. It needed people who could build, teach, and manage. Life on the steppe continued with its familiar rhythms. Herds moved across green fields, families prepared food, and children learned the traditions of their ancestors. But now they were part of something much larger than individual tribes. The Mongols had found unity, yet beyond their homeland were powerful kingdoms with wealthy cities and ancient histories. The first major challenges for the newly united Mongol nation came from nearby kingdoms that had watched their rise with growing concern. Beyond the open grasslands were powerful neighbors with strong armies, wealthy cities, and long histories. One of the first targets was the Western Xia Kingdom, located along the edges of northern China. The Tangut people who ruled this region had built impressive cities and controlled important trade routes. They were experienced and defended their lands carefully. In 1207, Genghis Khan began his first campaign against Western Xia. For the Mongols, this was not only about gaining territory. It was also a test of their new unity and military organization. The Mongol army moved quickly across unfamiliar lands. Their greatest advantage was mobility. While many traditional armies depended on slow movements and heavy supplies, Mongol warriors traveled with their horses and adapted to changing conditions. They studied their enemies, learned from every battle, and changed their strategies when needed. This ability to adapt would become one of the reasons for their future success. After several campaigns, Western Xia accepted Mongol authority and became a dependent state. The victory showed other kingdoms that the Mongols were no longer a small group of steppe tribes. However, the greatest challenge nearby was the powerful Yuan Dynasty in northern China. The Yuan rulers controlled large cities, trained armies, and had access to advanced technology and resources. The relationship between the Mongols and Yuan was already filled with tension. Old conflicts, broken agreements, and competition for influence created a growing divide. Genghis Khan knew that defeating such a powerful enemy would not be easy. The Mongols would need patience, strategy, and determination. As the seasons changed across the steppe, preparations began for a much larger conflict. The people who had once fought only for survival were now preparing to face one of the strongest civilizations of their time. The age of Mongol expansion had truly begun. The campaign against the Yuan dynasty became one of the greatest challenges Genghis Khan had ever faced. Unlike the scattered tribes of the steppe, the Yuan ruled a vast kingdom filled with enormous cities, thick stone walls, and millions of people. For the Mongols, this was a completely different kind of war. They had spent generations fighting on open grasslands, where speed and movement decided the outcome of battle. Now they stood before fortified cities that could withstand long sieges. The Mongols quickly realized they would need to learn new skills. Instead of relying only on horseback attacks, Genghis Khan welcomed engineers and craftsmen who understood siege warfare. They built ladders, catapults, and other machines that helped the Mongols overcome strong defenses. The Mongol army also remained remarkably disciplined. Every soldier knew his role, and commanders communicated efficiently across great distances. Their organization allowed them to move quickly while staying united. As they advanced through northern China, many towns surrendered peacefully, hoping to avoid destruction. Others resisted, forcing long and difficult sieges. Each campaign taught the Mongols valuable lessons about fighting in unfamiliar landscapes. Beyond the battlefields, the empire continued to grow. Merchants followed the army, trading goods between distant regions. Travelers carried stories of the Mongols' remarkable speed and discipline. News of Genghis Khan spread far beyond China, reaching kingdoms that had never seen a Mongol rider. Despite these victories, Genghis Khan was already looking farther west. Beyond the deserts and towering mountains lay another powerful empire controlling some of the richest trade routes in the world. Its rulers had little idea that their future would soon become connected with the growing power of the Mongols. A new chapter was quietly approaching, one that would carry the Mongol Empire far beyond East Asia and into the heart of Central Asia. As the campaigns in northern China continued, Genghis Khan turned his attention toward the lands of Central Asia. Across deserts, rivers, and distant mountains stood the vast Khwarezmian Empire, a prosperous kingdom that controlled many of the greatest trading cities along the Silk Road. At first, Genghis Khan did not seek war. He hoped for peaceful trade between the two empires. A large group of Mongol merchants traveled west carrying valuable goods, hoping to build friendly relations. They expected to return with silk, spices, precious metals, and stories from distant lands. Instead, the merchants were arrested by a local governor, who wrongly believed they were spies. Their goods were taken and they were killed. Hoping to avoid conflict, Genghis Khan sent a second group, this time made up of ambassadors. In Mongol tradition, messengers were to be respected, even by enemies. But the Khwarezmian ruler rejected the peaceful mission. Several ambassadors were executed, while others were sent back in humiliation. For Genghis Khan, this was more than an insult. It was a violation of one of the oldest traditions shared across many cultures. He waited patiently, preparing his forces with great care. In 1219, the Mongol army began its march westward. Crossing vast deserts and rugged mountains, they advanced farther than many people believed possible. Their speed surprised city after city. Some towns opened their gates and accepted Mongol rule peacefully. Others resisted behind thick walls, hoping their defenses would hold. The campaign soon became one of the largest military expeditions of its age. Roads filled with travelers, soldiers, craftsmen, and messengers as the Mongol Empire expanded across Central Asia. The quiet grassland kingdom that had once struggled simply to survive had now become a power stretching across continents. Yet even greater changes still lay ahead, as the Mongols continued their remarkable journey toward the western edge of the known world. The campaign across the Khwarezmian Empire lasted for several years. One by one, many of its great cities fell under Mongol control. Places that had once been important centers of trade and learning now found themselves connected to a rapidly growing empire. Although many battles took place, Genghis Khan's greatest strength was not simply military power. It was careful planning. The Mongols gathered information before moving forward. Scouts traveled far ahead of the main army, studying rivers, mountain passes, roads, and nearby settlements. Their reports allowed commanders to make informed decisions long before reaching their destination. Communication remained one of the empire's greatest advantages. Mounted messengers carried orders across enormous distances, allowing separate armies to work together with remarkable coordination. As new regions joined the empire, life slowly began to change. Merchants found that many trade routes became safer than before. Travelers could move across thousands of miles under Mongol protection, carrying silk, spices, paper, medicines, and ideas between east and west. Different cultures also came into closer contact. Chinese inventors, Persian scholars, Central Asian merchants, and steppe herders all became part of the same expanding world. Languages, traditions, and knowledge traveled alongside caravans crossing the vast landscape. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan continued leading from the front. Even as he grew older, he spent much of his time on horseback, crossing deserts, rivers, and mountains with his army. His followers admired not only his leadership but also his willingness to share the hardships of the journey. By the early 1220s, the Mongol Empire stretched farther than anyone could have imagined only a generation earlier. Yet Genghis Khan believed one important task still remained. Before thinking about rest, he turned his attention back toward the east, where unfinished matters awaited him. The final chapter of his remarkable life was quietly beginning. After years of remarkable victories, Genghis Khan returned his attention to the Western Xia kingdom. Although its rulers had once accepted Mongol authority, they refused to provide the military support he expected during his western campaigns. To Genghis Khan, loyalty was one of the foundations of the empire. Agreements were meant to be honored, and promises were expected to be kept. When Western Xia rejected his request, he decided to lead one final campaign. In 1226, the Mongol army crossed familiar grasslands and dry deserts once again. The soldiers were experienced veterans who had traveled thousands of miles together. Their discipline, organization, and ability to move quickly remained unmatched. As the campaign continued, several towns surrendered peacefully, hoping to avoid unnecessary suffering. Others chose to defend their walls, believing they could withstand the approaching army. Even during these demanding months, Genghis Khan continued to lead from horseback. He was now in his 60s, an age many leaders of the time never reached. Years of travel, harsh weather, and constant campaigns had left their mark, yet he remained determined. Then, during the campaign, his health began to fail. Historical records do not fully agree on what happened. Some suggest he became seriously ill. Others describe injuries suffered during the journey. Whatever the cause, it became clear that the great leader was nearing the end of his life. In the summer of 1227, Genghis Khan passed away. The exact location of his burial remains one of history's greatest mysteries. According to tradition, those who buried him kept the site secret, ensuring that no grand monument would reveal its location. Even today, historians continue searching for answers. The man who had once been an abandoned boy on the Mongolian steppe had transformed the course of world history. But the Mongol story was far from over. A vast empire now stretched across Asia, and its future rested in the hands of a new generation determined to carry forward Genghis Khan's extraordinary legacy. After the death of Genghis Khan, the empire did not fall into chaos as many neighboring rulers had expected. Long before his final campaign, he had prepared a plan for succession, hoping to preserve the unity he had spent a lifetime building. The Mongol princes and senior commanders gathered for another great Kurultai, the traditional council where important decisions were made. After careful discussion, they chose Genghis Khan's third son, Ogidi, as the next great Khan. Ogidi possessed a calm and thoughtful personality. While he respected his father's achievements, he also understood that governing an enormous empire required more than military success. Roads, communication, trade, and administration all needed careful attention. One of his first priorities was strengthening the empire's system of communication. Relay stations were expanded across thousands of miles, allowing fresh horses and supplies to wait for official messengers. Important news could now travel across the empire with remarkable speed. Trade also flourished under Ogidi's rule. Merchants journeyed safely between China, Central Asia, and the Middle East, carrying silk, porcelain, spices, precious metals, and countless new ideas. For many travelers, the Mongol Empire became one of the safest places to cross long distances. The capital at Karakorum also began to grow. Although smaller than the great cities of China or Persia, it welcomed visitors from many cultures. Craftsmen, scholars, merchants, and diplomats all arrived, bringing different languages, religions, and traditions together. Meanwhile, the Mongol army continued preparing for new expeditions. Experienced generals studied distant lands beyond the western horizon, where powerful kingdoms remained untouched by Mongol rule. Across Europe, few people understood what was approaching. Stories about mysterious horsemen from the east reached castles and villages, but many dismissed them as exaggerated tales told by frightened travelers. Soon, those distant rumors would become reality. A new generation of Mongol commanders was preparing to ride farther west than any army from the steppe had ever traveled before. After the fall of Kiev, the Mongol army continued its journey into the heart of Europe. Rivers, forests, and mountain passes replaced the familiar grasslands of Central Asia, yet the experienced commanders adapted with remarkable confidence. Batu Khan and the veteran General Subutai divided their forces into smaller groups. Each followed a carefully planned route, allowing the army to cover vast distances while remaining connected through skilled messengers. This strategy often confused their opponents, who struggled to predict where the Mongols would appear next. In 1241, the Mongols entered Poland and Hungary. News of their arrival spread rapidly from village to village. Church bells rang, messengers rode through the countryside, and rulers hurried to organize their defenses. Despite facing unfamiliar landscapes, the Mongol army remained disciplined. Their horses carried them across muddy roads, open fields, and frozen rivers. Every soldier understood the importance of patience, preparation, and teamwork. The European kingdoms fought bravely, but many were divided by local rivalries and political disagreements. Coordinating large armies proved difficult, while the Mongols acted with remarkable unity under experienced commanders. For many ordinary people, daily life suddenly became uncertain. Farmers worried about their harvests, merchants paused their journeys, and families watched the distant roads with quiet concern. Yet far from the battlefields, peaceful villages still continued their routines, unaware of how quickly history was changing. As spring arrived, it seemed possible that the Mongols might continue deeper into Western Europe. Many believed they could eventually reach the great cities beyond the Alps. Then, quite unexpectedly, everything changed. A message arrived from the east carrying news that would alter the course of the campaign. The great Khan Ogdi had died. The empire now needed its princes and commanders to return home for the traditional council that would choose the next ruler. The westward advance slowed, and the future of Europe took a very different path than many had feared. The Mongol withdrawal from Europe became one of the most discussed moments in medieval history. After years of rapid expansion, the armies that had seemed unstoppable suddenly turned back toward the east. The reason was not defeat on the battlefield. The Mongol forces had achieved several important victories, and their commanders remained confident in their abilities. Instead, the death of Ogdi Khan created a political responsibility that could not be ignored. According to Mongol tradition, the leading princes and nobles had to gather at a Kurultai to choose the next great Khan. The empire was built on unity, and selecting a new ruler was considered one of the most important duties of the Mongol elite. Batu Khan and his army began the long journey back through the vast lands they had crossed before. Their return showed an important aspect of the Mongol Empire. Decisions were not made only on distant battlefields. Family, tradition, and leadership were equally important. Back in the empire's heartland, different branches of the royal family competed for influence. The descendants of Genghis Khan all shared a connection to the great founder, but each had their own ambitions for the future. Eventually, Genghis Khan, the son of Ogdi, became the next great Khan. His reign was short, but the empire continued to maintain its vast network of trade and communication. During this period, the Mongol world became a bridge between east and west. Travelers could cross enormous distances, carrying knowledge between civilizations that had previously known little about one another. Ideas, inventions, and stories traveled along the same routes as merchants. Chinese technologies reached Western lands, while scholars and craftsmen from Central Asia and Persia contributed to the growing empire. The Mongols were no longer simply warriors from the steppe. They had become rulers of a diverse world filled with different peoples, languages, and traditions. But managing such a massive empire was never easy. As the years passed, new leaders would face difficult choices about expansion, control, and the future direction of the Mongol world. After the short reign of Genghis Khan, the Mongol Empire entered another period of change. The leaders of the different branches of the royal family gathered once again to decide who would guide the empire into the future. In 1251, Mongol Khan became the new great Khan. He was a grandson of Genghis Khan and a capable ruler who believed that the empire needed stronger organization and careful management. Mongol focused on improving the administration of the vast territories under Mongol control. The empire now included many different peoples, from Chinese farmers to Persian scholars and Russian princes. Governing such a diverse world required patience and understanding. During his reign, the Mongols continued their campaigns in different directions. One of the most important expeditions was led by his brother Hulagu, who traveled west toward Persia and the Middle East. The Mongol army moved through difficult landscapes, crossing deserts and mountains as it approached powerful kingdoms that had existed for centuries. Many cities had never faced an enemy like the Mongols before. At the same time, Mongol's other brother, Kublai, was becoming increasingly important in East Asia. While the Mongol rulers had always valued their steppe traditions, Kublai showed a strong interest in Chinese culture, administration, and government. The empire was entering a new era. It was no longer only a story of conquest. Now it was also a story of ruling, building, and connecting different civilizations. The Mongols had inherited a massive empire, but maintaining it required new ideas. Across the lands they controlled, merchants continued traveling, scholars exchanged knowledge, and people from different cultures met along the great trade routes. Yet new challenges were approaching. The empire was becoming too large for one ruler to control easily. Different regions had different needs, and the ambitions of Genghis Khan's descendants sometimes created disagreements. As Mongol Khan prepared for new campaigns, the future of the Mongol Empire depended on how his family would balance unity with the growing independence of its distant territories. While Mongol Khan guided the empire from its center, his younger brother, Kublai Khan, was quietly building his own reputation in northern China. Unlike many Mongol leaders before him, Kublai spent years learning about the people, traditions, and government of the lands he ruled. He welcomed Chinese scholars into his court and listened carefully to experienced advisors. They taught him about farming, taxation, and the importance of stable local government. Kublai believed that winning the trust of ordinary people was just as valuable as winning battles. In 1259, everything changed. Monk Khan died during a campaign in southern China. His unexpected death left the empire without a clear leader and created uncertainty across its vast territories. Soon, two brothers claimed the title of Great Khan. Kublai declared himself the rightful ruler, while his younger brother, Erik Bok, received support from many traditional Mongol nobles in the homeland. Their disagreement soon became a civil war. Unlike earlier campaigns against foreign kingdoms, this conflict divided members of the same royal family. Friends found themselves on opposite sides, and different regions of the empire chose different leaders. For several years, both brothers struggled for control. Kublai relied on the wealth and resources of northern China, while Erik Bok drew strength from the traditional Mongol heartland. Eventually, Kublai gained the advantage. In 1264, Erik Bok surrendered, and Kublai emerged as the undisputed Great Khan. Although the conflict had ended, it left lasting effects. The unity that Genghis Khan had worked so hard to create was beginning to weaken. The distant Mongol Khanates became more independent, making their own decisions instead of always following the Great Khan. Even so, Kublai looked ahead rather than backward. His greatest ambition was still unfinished. Beyond the Yangtze River stood the Southern Song Dynasty, the last major Chinese kingdom that remained outside Mongol control. The final conquest of China was about to begin. Kublai Khan now turned his full attention toward the Southern Song Dynasty, the last independent Chinese kingdom. Unlike the open grasslands where the Mongols had first built their empire, southern China was a land of rivers, mountains, forests, and crowded cities. The campaign would be unlike any the Mongols had fought before. The Southern Song possessed a strong government, experienced generals, and one of the largest navies in the world. Their river fleets protected important cities and trade routes, making any invasion slow and difficult. Kublai understood that victory would require patience. Instead of depending only on cavalry, he expanded his army with engineers, sailors, and soldiers from many different parts of the empire. Chinese and Central Asian experts helped design powerful siege machines capable of breaking through strong defenses. The war lasted for years. One city after another came under Mongol control, but the Southern Song continued to resist. Rivers became battlefields, and long sieges tested both armies. Progress was steady rather than quick. Even during the campaign, everyday life continued across much of China. Farmers planted rice, merchants sold silk and tea, and scholars prepared for government examinations. The rhythm of ordinary life carried on despite the distant sound of war. Kublai often preferred careful planning over unnecessary risk. He believed that preserving cities and encouraging peaceful surrender could strengthen the empire far more than endless destruction. By the mid-1270s, the Southern Song had lost much of its territory. Their remaining leaders continued to fight with determination, hoping to preserve the last independent Chinese court. The final chapter of the conquest was approaching. For the first time in centuries, it seemed possible that all of China would be united under a single ruler. If Kublai succeeded, the Mongol Empire would reach a new height, becoming not only the greatest land empire in history, but also the ruler of one of the world's oldest civilizations. In 1279, the long struggle finally came to an end. After years of determined resistance, the Southern Song dynasty was defeated, and for the first time in centuries, all of China came under the rule of a single emperor. Kublai Khan had achieved one of the greatest victories of the Mongol age. Several years earlier, in 1271, he had already announced the founding of a new dynasty. He named it the Yuan Dynasty, adopting a traditional Chinese dynastic title instead of ruling only as a Mongol Khan. It was a clear sign that he intended to govern China as an emperor, not simply as a conqueror. Kublai chose Khanbaliq, present-day Beijing, as his capital. The city grew into one of the largest and most impressive urban centers in the world. Wide streets, busy markets, government offices, and grand palaces reflected the strength of the new dynasty. Although Kublai remained proud of his Mongol heritage, he also embraced many Chinese traditions of government. Experienced officials helped manage taxes, agriculture, public works, and trade across the vast empire. The Yuan court welcomed visitors from many distant lands. Merchants, diplomats, artists, and scholars traveled along the Silk Road, bringing goods and ideas from Persia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. Among these travelers was the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, who later described the wealth and organization of Kublai Khan's court. His stories introduced many Europeans to a world they had never imagined. For ordinary people, life under the Yuan dynasty was a mixture of old traditions and new leadership. Markets remained busy, farmers continued working the land, and craftsmen produced silk, porcelain, and beautiful works of art. The Mongols had traveled an extraordinary path, from small tribes on the windswept steppe to rulers of the largest and most diverse empire on earth. Yet even at the height of its success, new challenges were quietly beginning to appear beneath the surface. At the height of Kublai Khan's rule, the Yuan dynasty was one of the most powerful states in the world. Its roads connected distant provinces, its markets welcomed merchants from many lands, and its capital attracted visitors from across Asia and beyond. For many ordinary people, daily life followed familiar routines. Farmers planted rice in the south and wheat in the north. Craftsmen shaped fine porcelain, carved wood, and wove beautiful silk. Merchants filled busy streets with goods arriving from every direction. The Silk Road entered a remarkable period of activity. Caravans carried spices, tea, paper, precious stones, and textiles across thousands of miles. Travelers could often move more safely than in earlier centuries because the Mongols protected many of the major trade routes. The empire also encouraged the exchange of knowledge. Doctors shared medical ideas, astronomers compared their observations, and engineers introduced new techniques from one region to another. Different cultures met not only through trade but also through conversation and cooperation. Yet life was not the same for everyone. The Yuan government organized society into different groups, and Mongols generally held the highest positions in the administration and military. Many Chinese officials continued serving the government, but some people felt they had fewer opportunities than in earlier dynasties. Even so, the empire remained remarkably diverse. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and followers of traditional Chinese beliefs all lived within its borders. In many places, different communities worked side by side, creating a rich mixture of languages and customs. Kublai Khan believed that a stable empire depended on prosperity as much as military strength. Canals were repaired, trade expanded, and cities continued to grow. For a time, the Yuan dynasty appeared strong and secure. But beyond the peaceful markets and busy roads, small signs of future trouble were beginning to appear. Governing such a vast empire required enormous resources, and the generations that followed Kublai would face challenges far greater than they expected. As the years passed, the Mongol Empire became more than a collection of conquered lands. It grew into a bridge connecting distant civilizations. From the shores of the Pacific Ocean to the plains of Eastern Europe, people, goods, and ideas traveled across routes that had never been so closely linked. Merchants crossed deserts with long camel caravans carrying silk, porcelain, spices, fine textiles, and precious metals. They stopped at busy trading towns where people spoke many different languages and exchanged stories from lands thousands of miles apart. Scholars also benefited from these connections. New knowledge about astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering spread from one region to another. Chinese inventions such as papermaking and printing became better known beyond East Asia, while scientific ideas from the Islamic world reached new audiences in the East. The Mongols generally valued skilled people. Craftsmen, architects, doctors, and engineers were often encouraged to continue their work because their knowledge strengthened the empire. Travel became easier than it had been for centuries. Along important roads, relay stations offered fresh horses, food, and shelter for official messengers. These stations helped information move across the empire with remarkable speed. Yet such a vast network also carried unwanted travelers. Diseases could spread more quickly along the same trade routes that carried valuable goods. Historians believe that increased movement across Eurasia later contributed to the spread of devastating epidemics, reminding people that closer connections could bring both opportunity and hardship. Despite these challenges, many remembered this period as an age of remarkable exchange. Different cultures met more frequently than ever before, shaping art, science, trade, and daily life across continents. Still, beneath the appearance of prosperity, the empire was slowly changing. The distant Mongol Khanates were becoming increasingly independent, and unity was beginning to fade. The next generation of rulers would discover that preserving a great empire could be even more difficult than building one. As the decades passed, the unity of the Mongol Empire slowly began to weaken. The empire was simply too vast for one ruler to control with the same authority that Genghis Khan had once commanded. Across Eurasia, four major Mongol Khanates had emerged. Each was ruled by a different branch of Genghis Khan's family. Although they shared the same ancestry, their priorities gradually changed. In China, Kublai Khan ruled the Yuan Dynasty. To the west, the Ilkhanate governed Persia and nearby lands. Farther north, the Golden Horde controlled the Great Plains of present-day Russia and parts of Eastern Europe. Between them stood the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. At first, these Khanates cooperated with one another. Trade continued to flourish, and envoys traveled between their courts. But over time, each region developed its own political interests, local traditions, and economic goals. Some rulers embraced the customs and religions of the people they governed. Others remained closer to the traditions of the Mongolian steppe. These differences gradually made cooperation more difficult. Even so, ordinary life continued. Farmers harvested their crops, merchants crossed the Silk Road, and families raised children much as they always had. Many people cared less about distant political disputes than about the changing seasons and the success of their local communities. After Kublai Khan's death in 1294, later Yuan emperors struggled to match his leadership. Some were capable, while others faced powerful court officials, financial difficulties, and growing unrest. The empire still appeared impressive from the outside, but its foundations were becoming less secure. The descendants of Genghis Khan had inherited an extraordinary legacy. Now they faced a new challenge, not conquering distant lands, but preserving what had already been built. In the years ahead, rising tensions, economic problems, and popular discontent would begin to reshape the future of the Mongol world. During the early 14th century, the Yuan dynasty remained one of the largest and wealthiest states in the world. Yet beneath its impressive appearance, new challenges were quietly growing. Running such a vast empire required enormous resources. Roads, canals, government offices, and military forces all demanded constant funding. Heavy spending placed increasing pressure on the imperial treasury. At the same time, nature brought its own difficulties. Floods damaged farmland in some regions, while drought affected others. Poor harvests left many farming families struggling to produce enough food. As prices rose, daily life became more difficult for ordinary people. The government attempted to solve some of these problems by printing more paper money. While this provided temporary relief, it also reduced confidence in the currency. In many markets, merchants became cautious, and trade grew less stable. Corruption created additional challenges. Some local officials collected unfair taxes or misused public funds. Honest administrators worked hard to serve their communities, but not every official acted with the same sense of responsibility. Despite these problems, the cities of the Yuan dynasty remained lively. Markets still welcomed traders from distant lands, scholars continued their studies, and artisans produced beautiful works of silk, porcelain, and metal. The empire's diversity remained one of its greatest strengths. Different languages, religions, and traditions continued to exist side by side, creating a remarkable blend of cultures rarely seen elsewhere in the medieval world. Yet people could feel that something was changing. Villagers spoke quietly about rising hardships. Merchants worried about uncertain trade. Farmers hoped for better weather and more reliable harvests. Across the countryside, dissatisfaction slowly began to spread. These challenges did not bring immediate collapse, but they weakened the foundations that Kublai Khan had worked so carefully to build. The years ahead would test the Yuan dynasty more severely than any foreign invasion, as growing unrest from within began to shape the final chapter of Mongol rule in China. By the middle of the 14th century, the Yuan dynasty faced growing unrest across many parts of China. What had once been a strong and confident empire was now struggling with financial problems, natural disasters, and increasing dissatisfaction among its people. Heavy floods along the Yellow River damaged villages and farmland. In other regions, drought left crops withered beneath the summer sun. Families who depended on successful harvests often found themselves with little food and even fewer resources for the coming year. As hardships grew, some communities began to question whether the government could still protect and support them. Local protests became more common, and in several provinces, small groups organized to resist imperial authority. Among the most well-known movements was the Red Turban Rebellion. Inspired by religious beliefs and hopes for a better future, its supporters attracted thousands of followers from farming villages and growing towns. Although the movement included many different leaders, it shared a common desire for change. The Yuan government attempted to restore order by sending armies to suppress the uprisings. In some places, the rebels were defeated. In others, they returned again and again, proving difficult to eliminate. Meanwhile, powerful regional commanders gained greater influence. As the central government weakened, local leaders often made important decisions without waiting for approval from the imperial court in Kenbalik. Trade also became less predictable. Some roads that had once been safe grew more dangerous, and merchants traveled with greater caution. As the Red Turban Rebellion spread across the countryside, one leader slowly rose above the others. His name was Zhu Yuanzhang, and unlike many powerful rulers before him, he had been born into a poor farming family. As a young man, Zhu experienced hunger, hardship, and uncertainty. These early struggles shaped his understanding of ordinary people's lives. Over time, he joined the rebellion and proved himself to be a thoughtful and capable leader. Rather than seeking quick victories, Zhu focused on building stable communities. He encouraged farming, strengthened local defenses, and earned the trust of many people who hoped for peace after years of conflict. Meanwhile, the Yuan government faced growing difficulties. Rival officials argued over important decisions, military commanders competed for influence, and the imperial court struggled to respond to problems across such a large territory. The empire that Kublai Khan had carefully organized was becoming increasingly difficult to govern. Communication slowed, resources became limited, and confidence in the central government continued to fade. Across China, more cities quietly changed their loyalty. Some opened their gates without resistance, believing that a new beginning might bring greater stability. Others remained loyal to the Yuan until the very end. By the late 1360s, Zhu Yuanzhang's influence had expanded across much of the country. His supporters believed that China should once again be ruled by a native Chinese dynasty after nearly a century of Mongol leadership. The balance of power had clearly shifted. The Yuan emperors still occupied their magnificent capital, but the world around them was changing rapidly. The once unstoppable empire of Genghis Khan's descendants was approaching its final chapter in China. Soon, the last Yuan emperor would leave Kenbalik, bringing the Mongol era in China to a close and marking the beginning of an entirely new dynasty. In the year 1368, the final chapter of Mongol rule in China quietly came to an end. After decades of growing unrest and continuous rebellion, Zhu Yuanzhang's forces marched toward Kenbalik, the grand capital of the Yuan dynasty. The city that Kublai Khan had transformed into the heart of his empire had stood proudly for nearly a century. Its wide streets, busy markets, and magnificent palaces had welcomed travelers from across Asia. Now, however, the atmosphere was very different. The last Yuan emperor, Togon Timur, realized that defending the capital would be difficult. Rather than allowing the city to become the center of a long and destructive siege, he chose to leave with his court and travel north toward the Mongolian homeland. With the emperor's departure, Zhu Yuanzhang entered the capital and officially established the Ming dynasty. For China, this marked the end of nearly 100 years of Yuan rule. Although the Yuan dynasty had fallen in China, the Mongols themselves did not disappear. Many returned to the familiar grasslands where their ancestors had lived for generations. There, they continued ruling what historians now call the Northern Yuan, preserving many of their traditions and way of life. Meanwhile, the new Ming government worked to rebuild the country. Officials repaired damaged farmland, restored government institutions, and encouraged agriculture and trade to recover after years of conflict. For ordinary families, life slowly returned to a more peaceful rhythm. Farmers planted new crops, merchants reopened their businesses, and children grew up in a world very different from the one their grandparents had known. The age of Mongol rule in China had ended, but its influence remained visible in trade, culture, and the connections it had created across Eurasia. The story of the Mongols was no longer one of conquest. It had become a lasting chapter in the history of the world, leaving behind a legacy that would continue for centuries. After losing control of China, the Mongols entered a new period of their history. The days of a single empire stretching across continents were gone, but the descendants of Genghis Khan continued to influence the regions where they lived. In Mongolia, many former Yuan leaders returned to the traditional homeland of the steppe. They continued the customs of their ancestors, living with horses, herds, and the changing seasons. Although their political power was smaller than before, their identity remained strong. In Central Asia, Persia, and Russia, the other Mongol Khanates followed their own paths. Some gradually became part of the local cultures they ruled. Over generations, Mongol rulers adopted new languages, religions, and traditions while still remembering their connection to Genghis Khan. The Golden Horde continued to shape the history of Russia for many years. Its influence affected trade, politics, and the relationships between Russian princes. In Persia, the Ilkhanate had already created a unique mixture of Mongol and Persian traditions. The world created by the Mongols did not vanish overnight. The roads they protected, the trade networks they expanded, and the cultural exchanges they encouraged continued to influence future generations. Ideas, inventions, and stories that had traveled across the empire remained part of the history of Eurasia. The Mongols also changed how people viewed distance and connection. Before their rise, many civilizations knew little about one another. After centuries of contact, East and West had become more closely connected. Their story was complex. They were remembered as powerful conquerors who destroyed cities and defeated great armies. But they were also builders of communication networks, supporters of trade, and rulers who connected distant societies. Like many great powers in history, the Mongol Empire carried both destruction and development within its legacy. The empire that began with scattered tribes on the Mongolian steppe had transformed the world in ways that few could have imagined. Even after its decline, the name of the Mongols continued to echo across history. Centuries after the height of the Mongol Empire, historians continued to study the remarkable journey of the people who once ruled the largest connected land empire in history. The story began with small tribes living beneath the endless skies of the Mongolian steppe. Through determination, organization, and the leadership of Genghis Khan, those divided groups became a powerful force that reshaped the world. The Mongols changed the way different civilizations interacted. Their empire created connections between places that had previously been separated by enormous distances. Merchants, travelers, and scholars moved more frequently between East and West, carrying goods and knowledge with them. Many important exchanges happened during this period. New technologies spread across regions, artistic styles influenced one another, and ideas from different cultures met along the great trade routes. The Mongol postal system, with its network of relay stations, became one of the most advanced communication systems of the medieval world. Messages that once took months to travel could move much faster across the empire. Their military methods also changed history. Speed, discipline, intelligence gathering, and careful planning allowed Mongol armies to achieve victories against powerful kingdoms. But the Mongol legacy was not only about conquest. Their empire brought together people from many backgrounds: Chinese craftsmen, Persian scholars, Central Asian merchants, and European travelers all became part of a connected world shaped by Mongol rule. Today, the Mongols remain one of history's most fascinating subjects because their story contains many different sides. They were warriors and administrators, conquerors and connectors, destroyers and creators. The rise of the Mongols showed how quickly history could change when a group of determined people found unity and purpose. From the quiet grasslands of Mongolia to the distant corners of Eurasia, their influence reached farther than anyone living in the 12th century could have imagined. And while their empire eventually disappeared, the story of the Mongols continued to inspire curiosity, research, and endless exploration.